How it is.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Bible Thumper podcast, where somebody's got to say it. My name is Patrick Hayes. I'm your regular host, and this evening we are going to be interviewing Scott Link. Before we bring Scott in, I just want to remind everyone to please use your phone and scan the QR codes on your screen, and you can follow us there on Google Podcast, on Spotify, on Apple Podcast. You can find us on Stitcher, Audible, TuneIn Radio, Blueberry, so just about anywhere you can listen to a podcast. Also, we have these cards that we've made up, so it's kind of like a little gospel track. Are you 100% sure you'd go to heaven if you died today? And on there is a QR code that brings you to a YouTube video of me giving the gospel. All you have to do is get in touch with me, and we can mail you a bunch of those if you want to help us pass them out. And we also got these stickers made up. So anybody, whoever makes a comment and gives the best comment or question of the evening, I'm going to mail them a half dozen of these stickers. They are high quality vinyl waterproof stickers that you can put on a water bottle or outside or wherever you want. We would ask that you get creative. Don't vandalize, but find a creative spot where people will see them and they will not get taken down, to try to help spread the word about the gospel and our podcast. So be sure, if you're watching us on Facebook Live or YouTube Live, you can comment or ask a question, and we can, have you be part of this evening. And if you're listening to us on a podcast, we would ask you that you join us every Sunday night at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, 8 p.m. Central, for an interview or a discussion about the Bible or whatever we're doing. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. And tonight we have with us Scott Link, former pastor of the Bible Baptist Church in Odem, Texas. Scott Link, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks, Patrick. It's great to be here on the Bible Thumper tonight.
Good. Did you get your Bible Thumper coffee mug that I sent you?
No, I sure didn't.
You didn't get that yet. That's all right. Well,
okay.
mail's slow
I'll be
nowadays.
On the lookout for
that. Yeah, be sure. It'll be coming. So, Scott, if you could start us out, you and I have known each other for a lot of years, but nobody else here, might know you. Start us out. How we met? How did we meet? Tell us a little bit about the background there and kind of how you got saved and just where you're starting from.
All right. Sounds good, Patrick. Yeah, we definitely have known each other a long time, like you said, and we definitely go back a long ways. To kind of give a little bit of back in my testimony, I think I ought to really talk about my family a little bit first. My mom's side, my grandfather was studying to be a Lutheran minister, and he actually ended up switching his major from basically being a pastoral degree, theology, whatever that was he was studying, and he switched it to chemistry. And the whole thing that they said, that the whole family story that I've always heard that's consistently told, is because the Greek was too hard for him, which I don't understand at all, because I've taken chemistry, and that was Greek to me. I could honestly tell you, having taken a little bit of Greek in college, that was much easier than I thought the chemistry was. But so they were Lutherans. My mom and all of her siblings pretty much walked away from the Lutheran faith. It's interesting too, because on my dad's side, he grew up in a fairly, I would say, religious household. They weren't, maybe like the most faithful church attenders, but he definitely had a lot more church background than I did growing up, and his family was Methodist. So, and again, if you're talking the old time Methodists, man, a lot of those guys were saved and really on fire back in the day. But probably by the time that the 50s and 60s rolled around, probably not quite so much as that. But really, my dad had pretty much walked away from, church and things before I was born as well, and was really more in the secular world, just trying to, do things with business and things, and really just didn't have time for church until he ended up having some kids. And really, my parents didn't make church a huge priority in their lives. Honestly, they were just pretty much Christian Easter only kind of people. And I wouldn't even call them Christians, because from what I know of my dad's testimony, he definitely was not saved by what I would say of being a born again Christian. In terms of my mom, she's definitely heard the gospel enough times that it's possible she might be saved. But it's definitely changed a lot of her lingo, the way that she's spoken, just because of the many times that she has heard the gospel. But she keeps on going back to a time when she was very young. And just from my childhood, I never saw any evidence that my parents were saved. And especially, again, if she's going back to this time of her salvation, I definitely didn't see any life changes that I would say would lead me to believe that she had been a Christian when I was a child. So again, really kind of doubt that she probably is saved at this point either, but there's still hope there. And again, she does know, the gospel. So, I definitely think that she could get saved if she wanted to at this point. But again, just kind of growing up in that sort of environment, my parents weren't really majorly faithful about going to church or anything like that. So really it wasn't until the time, I should step back, and they baptized me, like most of the kids, when I was probably, 2, 3 years old, something like that. And it was just kind of the sprinkling.
Now, what church was that in?
It was
What
in
type
a
of church
Methodist
was that?
church. It was a Methodist church.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Methodists sprinkle their kids as well. I know the Lutherans do, and me growing up Catholic, I know they do, but I wasn't aware that the Methodists do as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's across the board. I know that the particular one that I went to, that's what they were doing. So that is something that, looking kind of more at their overall, doctrines and things, I'm a little surprised by that. But, it's one of those quote unquote mainstream Christian churches now. So, I'm not really entirely surprised looking back at it either, that's what they were doing. But yeah, I was probably about 3 years old whenever my parents got me sprinkled there. But really until I was about, 9, they didn't really start really more consistently going to church. Then I'm not really exactly sure what prompted it, but I do distinctly remember when I was 9 years old, starting to go to Sunday school a lot more frequently. My Sunday school teacher gave me my very first Bible. I think it was an RSV or something like that. And, I'll tell you what, Patrick, I was honestly looking for God at the time. And I think that if I had had a clear presentation of the gospel, I probably could have gotten saved at that point. But, unfortunately, just with the watered down way that the church was and everything, I really didn't even have a clear presentation of the gospel that I could legitimately say. I do remember, coloring some pictures, singing some songs, but I don't really remember anything life changing from my experience there. And again, I don't really know what caused my parents to start going to church at that time. Maybe they just had, older kids, grade school age, and they felt like it was time to start going back to church or something. But like I said, my parents were never really heavily involved, and we kind of went back to the Christmas and Easter sort of thing. And it was probably when I was about 12 years old, they have something called confirmation, which I think is, Catholic growing up, you would have known as catechism, but it's kind of a similar idea there. And I started going to some Bible classes and things like that after school, certain days of the week and whatnot. And again, I think that there was a good opportunity that if I had had somebody that was there to answer my questions, that I probably could have also gotten saved at that time as well, as probably about a 12-year-old kid. So I really find it a tremendous shame, especially looking back at that age. I was really at a very pivotal point in my life. And I think that obviously, the younger that somebody can get saved, the better for them, obviously. But, I think that there's a lot of things that I went through that certainly could have been avoided if I had gotten saved at that time and had, genuine change in my life. But again, just with the way that the church was, I was probably seen as very confrontational, just sort of asking a lot of busybody type questions. And the youth pastor sort of just kind of wrote me off and really didn't take my questions serious at that time. So it's interesting to me too, because I did the whole, kit and caboodle. I went through the whole process, and they confirmed me into their church as still an unbeliever. Which I have to say, probably a lot of churches in America are like that. They have confirmed members of their church that don't even believe in God necessarily, don't believe in Jesus, don't believe that the Bible is the word of God. There's probably dozens and dozens of people in every church that are probably like that, So, really after that, go ahead.
Sorry, it sounds like checking a box. And we run into that even in churches that are sincere and want their people to know the Bible. It seems to be a downfall of man that we can easily get away from what's important and what God wants, and we can move over to checking a box, which makes us feel like we suffice.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
So go ahead. So now you've been confirmed in the Methodist Church, and now what?
So yeah, my parents really kind of never really continued to get involved. I actually, at a certain point after I became confirmed, became like an altar boy. I'm not exactly sure what the terminology for that is there, but I was lighting the candles and sort of things for about a year maybe. But again, we were all going to maybe, the Sunday morning church or whatever. They had other services and things throughout the week or whatever. They had other things. And I did go to like a Christian camp one time when I was maybe like 13 or something. But again, at this point, I was definitely not really taking a walk with God seriously, especially because, like I said, the opportunity was there for the youth pastor during the confirmation, that if he had seriously answered my questions, I think I really legitimately probably would have started to seek God more at that point. But honestly, it was more of a thing. Just I was kind of more to try to make my mom happy me, just to try to, I feel like it was a good thing to do, I guess. But I mean, really, I kind of got bored with it, especially because I wasn't genuinely saved and just didn't have a walk with God at that point. I decided to step back and not do that role anymore of lighting the candles and whatnot and doing that sort of a thing.
Now, let me ask you a question. Was there any emphasis at home? Were you reading the Bible together as a family? Were you praying together as a family? Was there any, effort in that direction in your home?
Not at all. The only time that we would ever pray was when my grandparents, like I said, my Lutheran grandparents had come over for dinner or for lunch. And that was pretty much the only really spiritual influence that I had in my life at that point, was just a few moments of prayer there over before our meal.
Okay.
And really, again, from my dad's side of the family, there was not really like a lot of like religious push. I mean, I do have an aunt. His sister was pretty heavily involved in a Christian church, but it's one of those things. I don't think that my dad was really wanting me to be exposed a lot to that, and certainly my grandparents, even though, like I said, when they were raising their kids, they did attend church more faithfully. They really kind of walked away a lot from that as they got older as well, and on my dad's side. So I mean, my dad's father, my paternal grandfather, was very much heavily believing in evolution, believed in a lot of the scientific Big Bang sort of thing. And I mean, I was at a young age kind of leaning more towards that approach in my life, and really thinking that was, again, from my grandfather's influence, that was probably how, we came to be, was through basically the Big Bang, through just billions of years of processes, and the whole kind of thing that the public education system will push from such a young age. I mean, even at a very young age.
So that's another good point. So you were in public school this whole time.
Yes, I was. Yeah.
Yeah. And Scott, let me ask you, I got a little bit of an echo that I can hear. Do you hear me coming through a second time?
No, I don't.
Yeah. I don't know what it is. It doesn't matter. It's not too loud. So hopefully it's not annoying everybody. There are a lot of similarities between, hold on one second. I'm going to see if I mute you. Test. Yeah, if I mute you, then the echo goes away. I don't know. Well, it doesn't matter. There's not much we can do on your side. Okay, forgive me. There are a lot of similarities that I find between you and me, and your story and my story. Even though I grew up Catholic and you grew up Methodist, we both grew up in public school. We both grew up in homes where, church and God weren't that serious, because we didn't really pray or read the Bible at home. There wasn't a whole lot of that. It was really just checking a box. And for us, we went to church. We were more every Sunday Catholics, but still, I mean, I never knew what was going on, and nobody answered any of my questions.
Yeah.
So tell us now, bring us up to when you got saved. Okay. So, because there's lots of kids in America that grow up in a home like yours, and a lot of them aren't saved by the time, they're your age. So what was different? What happened?
So yeah, I would say probably by the time I was about 13, my parents had totally stopped going to church altogether. And again, my sister and I were really not interested in going to church. I mean, I'm sure if we had been interested, they probably would have continued to take us. But by that time, I'd bought the whole evolution thing hook, line, and sinker. I mean, I was a confessing atheist. I was very hostile towards religious things. And again, I think that there's a lot of the public school background involved in that mentality. But again, with my parents, really not. I mean, I would say my dad was probably an agnostic. I mean, he really was not an atheist. And my mom certainly, being a professed Christian, but not really a Christian. I think, she was not really, pushing anything one way or the other. But again, by the time I was about 15, my mom was still taking us to church for Christmas and Easter. And one morning she just woke me up out of the blue. I mean, I was a teenage kid. I'd probably been up until about 2 a.m. And, she woke me up very early from what I was thinking, probably 8:30 or something, and said, "Hey, get up, we're going to church." I was just like dazed, because, she never woke me up in the morning early for anything. And it was, of course, a weekend. So I had really no expectation or reason to get up. And she said, "Hey, it's Easter Sunday. We're going to church." So I was like, okay, well, go without me. I'm pretty tired, so I'm gonna go to sleep. And my mom was just not having it, so she insisted that we all get up. So she drugged me to church, and I was probably one of the most unhappy people there that day, but I was reluctantly there. And
it's okay. I hate Easter too. I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah, so, I was really just kind of miserable just being there, super tired and looking around, and, I looked at all these people and they were super happy. I mean, they were joyful, they were singing. I mean, they were, super excited to be there. I mean, you could see just the happiness on their faces, and I was like, "Man, what is going on with these people? Why are they so happy?" Because again, with all the things in my life, I mean, obviously just with that day and being unhappy and, for the circumstances, but just in my life in general, I didn't have any peace. I didn't have the peace of God. I didn't have any, love for anybody. And, it was just very self-centered worldview, honestly. And, just with all of those things, I didn't have a lot of joy or happiness or peace in my life. And, just seeing the happiness and joy in those faces made me kind of question, do I really know everything about Christianity that I thought I did? Because, I had explored, through public school and just my own personal research about the major religions. You look through textbooks and different things about, Muslims and Jews and, different things. And you kind of, oh, because I read 2 pages on the Christian faith, I must be an expert on what they
Hmm.
believe. So, I went back and talked to one of my friends named Jeff, and I knew that his family took him to church frequently and he was pretty involved. And I knew that he had invited me to do youth stuff, but I was really,
Hmm.
pretty antagonistic towards him. I didn't really want to do any of that kind of stuff. But I started talking to him and I was like, "Hey Jeff, why do you go to church?" And it was more like, "Well, my parents make me," kind of a thing. But it was like, all right, so if that's all that there is to church and whatever, like, okay, whatever. But I had a lot of really, I would say, deep questions that I felt like really needed to get answered, and those were the same types of questions that had gone in unanswered since when I was confirmed into the Methodist Church. And unfortunately, I guess I was still searching. Just they never got an answer. And I mean, they weren't like really crazy things. I mean, especially just looking back at it, if I just sat through some basic Sunday school classes, I probably could have learned probably the majority of the answers to the questions. But um, he was
You
like,
got to go to church to do that. So
yeah,
that wasn't going to happen.
exactly, right. So, I was kind of stumping him on some of those things, because again, I mean, he was probably the typical teenage kid, really just there for more for the fun and the activities and the things that the church was offering rather than like the deep biblical kind of conversations that I was actually looking for to have answered.
Hmm.
But he said, what? I know somebody from my youth group that has a little bit more knowledge of the Bible, and so she'll be able to, probably answer some of those questions. And so he introduced me to a friend that's a mutual friend of ours, Megan Reinertson, and so she was able to answer some of my questions, but she definitely didn't know all of them. So
Hmm.
she said, I just met an evangelist. He's coming through our church, and I think that he'd be really happy to talk with you, and that actually was you.
Hmm.
So, she got me in contact with you, and you were super excited when I gave you a call, and you were like, "Yeah, let's meet." We arranged a time and a place. We're going to meet at a restaurant. Megan was going to be there because she was going to introduce us, and kind of, she was excited because she had just gotten. I think she just got saved, if I'm not mistaken. But I mean, whatever the case was, she was starting to have like a lot of a real walk with God at that time, starting to read the Bible, starting to really get really involved and her walk with God. So I mean, she was super excited to see the potential of somebody getting saved, and I had known her for a while. I mean, her brother was my age. We'd been friends, through grade school and things, um, and I kind of had known her, seen her around from elementary school and things. So I mean, I knew who she was, but um, I wouldn't say she was a friend or anything like that. I mean, we definitely weren't even in the same circles or anything like that. I mean, really, it's more like when you're that age, it's like, oh, you're your friend's sister. It's like, okay, whatever. But
Hmm.
so, anyways, then she introduced us. We went to the restaurant and saved that, but it was probably maybe 20 or 30 questions. Like I said, super basic things, but very important things to me at the time to have answered. Things like, how did Noah get the two animals in the ark, and just
Hmm.
things about the flood, and about things about creationism that I thought were kind of foolish, and just a whole handful of things to kind of a skeptical person might have. And again, still
Sure.
being a professed atheist at the time, you were really kind of walking me through those things. And I mean, I don't really exactly remember what point you were at your life, but I know that you had just become an evangelist, that you had just basically sold everything. You walked away from your business, you walked away from a lot of things. You were, I think, living out of the back of your truck, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, you were just really going, um, very bare subsistence living there. And I mean, it was like, God has called me to preach, and I'm going to preach. And it was probably one of those early days there that Megan introduced me to you. But um, so yeah, that was we sat down. I don't know how long. It must have been 2.5 or 3 hours. It seems like, probably
Hmm.
just looking back at it. I mean, and it was interesting too, because I mean, each one of my questions, you took it back to the Bible. You were showing me verses from the Bible. You're like, hey, that's a great question. Let's look in Genesis about what it says about that question. And you were really showing me, I think, for the first time in my life, about somebody about answering directly from the Bible. And, again, like I'd said, and I was probably going through the confirmation. I was kind of trying to read through the Bible here and there. And, somebody had along the way told me, I should, start in the book of John and kind of keep on going from there. And, you also at the end of that, conversation told me the same thing. You gave me a New Testament. I think it was an NIV or something like that. But anyways, you gave me some kind of semblance of the Word of God and told me, hey, start in the book of John. And I was like, all right, I can, do that. But then you said, hey, you know what? So you said that you're an atheist. You said there's basically two types of atheists. There's the dishonest atheist, and then there's the atheist that doesn't know that they're not an atheist. And then you basically drew a picture on a piece of paper, napkin, maybe even, I can't remember, but it was like a rectangle, and you said, okay, let's imagine that this rectangle represents all of the knowledge that there is to know in the whole entire universe. And I said, all right, let's, I can imagine that. So you cut it in half and drew a line down the middle and said, okay, so this is the half that you know. Let's imagine that you know all of the half of the knowledge that there is to know in the whole universe. And you asked me, do you know half of everything that there is to know? And I said, of course not. I don't even know even a tiny percentage of that. So you said, okay, so let's imagine that you know as much as half of everything that there is to possibly know about every detail about everything. So I said, okay, let's, I'll go with you there. You said, what if God's in the half that you don't know about? And, that was just a mind-blowing thing for me to consider. You took me immediately from being an atheist to an agnostic at that exact moment. And, just because I never really considered that, being so proud, or I don't know what it is, just so deceived or blinded by the very fact. I mean, being a 15-year-old kid thinking that I knew everything or even know enough to say there is no God with certainty. It's very, comical to look back at that. But I mean, so many people say that with such certainty. And it's like they don't know anything about even the tiniest fraction of what there is to know. And how can you say with such certainty that for sure there is no God? So, I mean, that was just really an eye-opening statement to me. And I mean, so again, after you told me to, you presented the gospel clearly to me at that point, and you went through, that basically, have you ever sinned? And I was like, well, of course I have. Everybody's sinned. And I mean, I just wrote that off as, okay, so what you're saying doesn't apply to me. But then you started going down, okay, well, have you lied? Have you stolen? And man, that one got me right there, because I'd gotten in trouble as a kid with another friend of mine. And I was shoplifting something. I was like, you know what? Not everybody has shoplifted before. So I was like, you got me there. I was like, you know what you're talking about? If there is a God, and if it is the God of the Bible, then I definitely need to be
I'm in
saved.
trouble. Yeah.
Yep, I'm in trouble. So, with that thought, you left me and you said, hey, you know what? I'm going to be going to Megan's church in a few weeks. I'm going to be giving my testimony about how I got saved. And you said, since, you gave me, or since I gave you my time for, 2.5 hours, how about you come and give me, your time for another evening as well? So I said, okay, that's a fair deal. So I said, go ahead and read John, Acts, and Romans, and then come to this this meeting, this church service, in a couple of weeks. I can't remember. It was maybe 2-3 weeks. So I said, all right, it's a deal. So during that time, I started reading John, Acts, and Romans, got a good foundation about what the Bible said about, the life of Christ, about the crucifixion, about the resurrection, about the early church, about basic Bible doctrines from the book of Romans. I mean, all good stuff there for a searching person. Again, at that point, I had in my mind, if there is a God, I better find this out, because again, you just really threw a monkey wrench in my whole worldview that, hey, there might possibly be a God. And if there might be a God, then, there's probably a good chance that he's out there if I will look for him. So again, I didn't know if that was going to be the God of the Bible or anything like that. I mean, who knows? I mean, I was at that point still very open and searching for whatever the answers might be. But anyways, it was a Wednesday night, May 7th, 2003, and you were at First Presbyterian Church of Grand Junction, Colorado. And, it's again a funny thing, because when I was being interviewed to become a pastor, they said, when you put on your resume that you got saved at a Presbyterian church, we didn't know if we could take you seriously. And I was like,
baptized as a baby at a Methodist church and saved as a teenager, atheist at a Presbyterian church. Yeah. Would you like to hire me as your pastor of your independent Baptist church?
Yeah, it's not your typical background as a fundamental Baptist, that's for sure. So
yep, I get
kind
it.
of an interesting background there. But anyways, I was listening to your testimony and about how you got saved, and I'm sure that you've probably talked about that, various times in this podcast already. But to me, I was like, wow. So if there is a God, the God that Patrick is talking about has to be the God that is real. And I was just like, there is nobody that could change a person's life as much as God has changed Patrick's life as the real, true God. So I went up to you after the service and I said, Patrick, you know what? I believe in God because of you. You said, great, that's wonderful news. Let's get on our knees and ask God to save you. So we did just that. We got on our knees and I prayed the sinner's prayer there, just confessing my sins, put my faith in Jesus Christ that day, asked him to save me from hell and to take me to heaven when I died. And just didn't know a single thing else other than that, and that
Sure.
night, literally that night, I was laying in bed thinking, okay, so I'm a Christian now. What does a Christian do?
Now what? Yep.
And I was thinking there for probably about 10 minutes, and I literally couldn't think of a single thing. I was like, Christians go to church, so I guess I'm going to start going to church on Sundays. And, that's exactly what I did. And I think you were having a Bible study or something like that, and I started getting involved with that. And I started, going to church more frequently and just kept on going to that same church. So I started bouncing around to other churches. I started growing as a Christian, started reading the Bible. That caused me to grow tremendously. I can't say how much for a new Christian or any believer, really, just reading the Bible. Not even listening necessarily to preachers or podcasts and all those things are great and wonderful, but just sitting down and reading a few chapters of the Bible. it is amazing how much spiritually you will grow just doing that. And there was a lot of genuine growth going on there at that early phase, the first few weeks, first few months. And changes were happening in my life. Just incredible things. And again, I'm a freshman in high school, public school. And, it's the end of the school year. So, had the whole summer ahead of me. And I started getting involved in church, started going to all the activities. You had some friends and things. You were going out street preaching. Man, I was going out there. And I remember I got, handed a bunch of tracts and said, here, go pass these out to some people. We're on the main street of our downtown district. The people are out there for a stroll. And some guy takes one, he looks at it, said, okay, what do you believe? I honestly, with my jaw dropped, and I've been saved for maybe a few days, and I had absolutely no idea what to say to him. I was like, I'm going to find out. So that's when I really did start to delve into the Bible, started to read it, started to really want to know what does the Bible say, and started to learn a whole lot more about that. And, I don't know if you have any other questions or anything else about that, but otherwise I'll probably just hop into.
No, man, that's great. So now after this, just to fast forward ahead a little bit. So how old were you at this point when you got saved? How old were you?
So I was 15 and a half. So
that's freshman year of high school. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So you and I knew each other for 4 more years while you went through high school, or 3 more years or whatever. And we went to church together, and we got to know each other, and we spent a lot of time together, doing normal church stuff. And then at what point was it your senior year when you felt like God was calling you to be a preacher?
Oops, sorry there.
Okay.
Yes. So I was just reading my Bible through the book of Romans. And, again, this was just, my regular daily Bible reading. I didn't have any particular schedule. At this point, I think I read the Bible maybe 2 or 3 times at this point, something like that. And I was just reading through Romans chapter 10. This is, again, just my daily Bible reading. I'm just sitting there with my legs kicked up on my chair. And I'm just, there just starting my day off with the Bible. And I get to Romans chapter 10, verse number 13, and it says, for whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. And I was sitting there meditating, thinking, praise God, thank you for that wonderful promise that if anyone will call upon the name of the Lord, that they will be saved. They'll be saved from hell. They'll be saved from that second death, and they'll be saved from their sins. And I was just really, rejoicing upon that verse and just, thinking about that, just really meditating upon that there. And I got to the next verse, verse number 14, and it asks a series of 3 questions. It says, how then shall they call upon him in whom they have not believed? And I was just really thinking about that question. That really was just getting to me there. And I was just like, how are people going to call upon Jesus if they've never believed in him? I was like, it's impossible. And I said, and it asks another question, and how should they believe in him whom they have not heard? I was like, man, that's
also a good question. Yep. And
then finally, and how shall they hear without a preacher? And it was just like God was just speaking to me right there. And it was like, God, if you call me to be a preacher, I will be a preacher. Is that what you want me to do? And I was just like, surrendering right there, and basically just like, Lord, if you want me to be a preacher, to tell people so they can hear your name and to be saved, then I will be a preacher. And I mean, I didn't really know what all that meant at that time, but it was just like an amazing thing. And I was just, really dumbfounded by that, and just really kind of like, I don't know if that's what God wants, or if I'm just like, whatever, just in the moment of this thing. So for the next several days, I was praying, and, I just really at that point, I think already surrendered about that. And, I was already scheduled to go. This was the summer right before my senior year. And I was scheduled to go to a conference, like a class conference with my high school newspaper in Denver, which was about 4.5 hours away from where I was living. So, the whole way there, I just remember I was praying to God and just asking, Lord, I'm surrendered. If you want me to be a preacher, I'll be a preacher. But please just, Lord, if there's any way that you could give me like some kind of confirmation. I mean, I wasn't necessarily asking for a sign or anything like that. But I mean, I was like, Lord, if you would give me a sign, I'd certainly take it. And my whole group of kids, it was probably a whole van full of kids, maybe like 20 of us, including the teachers and things that were there in a totally different town. I had no idea who anyone was at that point. We're just at a rest stop, basically just getting some lunch before we had our activity that we were planning to go in for the day. And, as we got up to leave from the meal, I heard a booming voice from across the room. Hey, you! I just knew that it was talking to me. But because it was so loud and because it was like a public place, I didn't know what was going on there. I just like put my head down and just like ignore this guy, like pretend like I didn't hear who this guy was saying there. And so then I heard it again, except it was even louder. I mean, it was like, hey, you, just like at the top of his lungs. I mean, I was just like, man, I better go over there before this guy starts making a scene. Like, I don't know who this guy is, what he wants, or anything like that. So I beeline.
But he was talking to you.
I knew he was talking to me for sure, loud,
okay.
Loud and clear. So I go over to this table, and this guy's got a big, angry face on him. He looks like he could be, a linebacker for the Denver Broncos. I mean, I was there just like terrified. Like, what did I do to make this guy upset? Like, why is he so angry? This huge guy that he's just like, yelling and upset. And I'm just like, yes, sir. And he's like, son, God is calling you to be a preacher. And I was just dumbfounded, blown away, like, what in the world? And I was like, I've been praying for that. I believe so too. And, he quoted, I can't remember, a verse from Jeremiah. And I was just like, man, that is an amazing thing. All my class members had already gone up and everything. I mean, they had heard what was going on a little bit, but, they kind of were leaving. When I came back, they were like, what happened? Why was that guy yelling at you? And I was like, you guys are not going to believe this. I mean, these guys are lost. They're, public school teachers and kids and stuff. And I was just like, now, I don't know if this means anything for you guys. It probably doesn't. But I was like, to me, this is just like another confirmation that this is something that I'm supposed to do. So after we got back, I told my pastor at the time, I was like, what? I believe God has called me to be a preacher. And, let me back up a little bit too, to tell me about that story, because like you said, we've gone to kind of some different churches and things like that, but we ended up at the same church there. And the main reason I was going to that church was because they were preaching and teaching and believed the King James Bible was the word of God. And, for me, that was a big thing. Already at that point, I'd already realized, and I think that you probably had already told me, hey, the NIV is garbage, get that out of here. And I think that you probably even given me or told me to go buy a new King James or something. And I was reading that, didn't really want to give it up. Through the course of my Bible studies with my friends and different people, just hearing different things, it was like, there's something different about these other versions that I'm reading. And, people are reading all kinds of versions. And it's like, this is not right. At the church I was going to, this guy was always, they had a person filling in from time to time whenever the pastor was gone. He was always like big on the Greek, big on the Greek. I mean, everything about, the Greek and this. And
the Greek, it means this. I know.
And, that
don't you love those guys?
Yeah. So, I mean, by the time that, I was, finally starting to read the King James Bible, and I had, realized on my own really that this was the word of God, that this has to be for the English language. And every time that he was saying that, it was like, to me, this guy doesn't even believe that we have God's word in our language. I was like, there's something wrong about this situation. So I really started to church hop at that point. By that time, it was like Christmas time. And, my mom wanted us to all go to church as a family with my Lutheran grandparents, whatever. But, we had just found this little Baptist church. I mean, just a hole in the wall place in a rundown part of the city. I was just like, I don't know about this place. But, Patrick is saying, I got to check this thing out. And I'm like, all right, I'll go because Patrick said to go. And man, it was like, fiery preaching. I mean, it's King James Bible. I mean, it was just like what I needed. And then the next service, we go to this dead dry, horrible, like Lutheran service that they're preaching heresy. I mean, like all sorts of things about the Virgin Mary saving us, and just like a horrible rubbish that it's like, this is the worst. Like, this guy is clearly not saved. I don't know what they're even talking about, man. My sister and I were getting furious. Listen to this guy, and we're like, we have to go back to that little Baptist church that we went to because they preached the King James Bible. And I was like, this is like the end of our church hopping, we're done with that. So, and I went to talk to my pastor there at the time, and he said, all right, well, if God's calling you to preach, you better go to Bible college. And at the time I was like, I don't know about that. I'm sure I could just stay here, just kind of, follow you around, just kind of, have you teach me, have you disciple me, mentor me. He's like, no, Scott, you got to go to Bible college. You got to learn some more things about the Bible than what I'm going to be able to help you with. So I said, all right, what do you recommend? So he gave me the name of a few schools. And a few months later, I was kind of doing the whole senior thing, checking out Bible colleges and things like that. And, I checked out one of the schools. And I actually went with you as a pastor's conference, a pastor's school. And we were out there in Indiana, and we're checking out one of the biggest churches in our, I guess, denomination, for lack of better phrasing of that. And we're looking around, and I was like, man, something is not right about this place. I was like, I just do not have a peace about being here. I mean, when they came out wearing, the whole choir was wearing sackcloth. And I mean, I get that there's a picture of humility and things there, but I just didn't sit right. It was just like, this is not the right picture to be doing what they're doing. And I mean, there's just a few other things. I mean, it was a good conference. I mean, I definitely got helped spiritually, but it was like, something just didn't give me a peace about that. So I went to the next school that my pastor recommended, and I was actually the school that I ended up going to, which was Golden State Baptist College in Santa Clara, California. And, when I checked that place out, and I was like, man, I had a great peace about that. I was like, man, there's a lot of things that I love about this place. I was like, this is definitely giving me a lot better impression, I guess you could say. But, I was still really kind of had a bitter taste in my mouth about the whole in the Greek sort of thing. And at that point, I was very King James Bible and not wanting to have any Greek lessons. So I was looking at some of the schools that I didn't have to take any Greek classes at all. And for one of the requirements for the major that I wanted to take, I did have to take 1 semester of Greek. So I was like, that might be a deal breaker for me. My pastor was like, no, Scott, just kind of suck it up and just kind of bite the bullet and do it. That's because that's the school I'm recommending you go to.
Yeah.
So after praying about that and things, I was like, what, if you're, sold in this place, then I'll do it, So, I ended up going out there, and I graduated a 4-year degree in 3.5 years. And I ended up staying for a master's degree, which was another year. And, I know that you wanted to kind of touch a little bit about, my experience with that. And, honestly, there's only a handful of classes that I would say really were valuable for me. I would say that looking back, even as a pastor, as a Christian, it's a sad thing to say, but I mean, a lot of the classes were a joke. And I mean, unfortunately, there's some teachers that I don't think they're really prepared for, like they should have been, didn't take it as seriously as they should have. I mean, I guess you get that with any kind of school, any kind of, with secular colleges and whatnot as well. I'm sure that there's those classes that you probably could have done without, sort of a thing. But, just thinking about the most valuable class was honestly a class called How to Study the Bible with Dr. Wilson Newcomb. That was the late Dr. Wilson Newcomb. And man, it was a tremendous class. And basically it was a hermeneutics class, which is basically showing you, the process of how to look at the Bible. Because if you don't look at it from the right world of view, you're not ever going to understand what the Bible is saying. And you really have to understand what the verse says in the context of the chapter.
Hold on. When you raised your hand there, you were rubbing up against a microphone or something, and we didn't hear the last 5 seconds. And what you were saying is very important. So please just go back to when you study the Bible, it is important.
Okay, so when you're studying the Bible, it's so critical that you understand what the verse says in the context of the chapter and in the context of the verses around it, and in context of the whole book of the Bible itself. For example, if you're reading John 3:16, you have to understand what the previous and following verses say, what the whole chapter says, what the whole book of John says, what the whole Bible says. Because so many times you'll get heresies that are taught because people are just taking 1 or 2 verses completely out of context, completely basically throwing out, the baby with the bathwater sort of thing, and disregarding other verses. Now, there's a lot of verses that people, skeptics and things, will call contradictions and this and that. But again, that's not, what what the Bible has. There's no contradictions in the Bible. There's just misunderstandings, lack of information. But
Hmm.
when I was in that class, I mean, it was so valuable. Things like when you're reading the Bible, you have to ask questions like, who is speaking in this
Hmm.
passage? Because
And
sometimes
who are
people
they speaking to?
exactly. Sometimes God's speaking. Sometimes people are speaking to other people. Sometimes people are speaking to God. Sometimes God's speaking to a group of people. Sometimes God's speaking to one person directly. And it's not something that every Christian should be applying to their lives.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's something for a very specific situation that you
Hmm.
can't just extrapolate and say, well, because this one person had a 40-day fast, that I
Yeah.
also should have a 40-day fast, for
Yeah.
example.
You got to go
There's
build an ark.
exactly. Yeah. So not a command for every person to do those type of things, but
Yeah.
it's one of those things that, again, I found that class to be the absolute most valuable class, was that hermeneutics class called How to Study the Bible. Just a tremendous class. And again, Wilson Newcomb was a wonderful pastor. He'd been in the ministry for probably 50 or 60 years and had pastored a couple of different churches at least. And he basically, the full circle basically for the ministry, you kind of start off going to Bible college, you kind of seem to pastor, do something in the ministry. And a lot of the pastors will end up as a professor, as a teacher out of Bible college as they are getting into their later golden retirement years, sort of a thing. And now that's kind of the cycle that he went through, but a tremendous class. Just thinking about some of the classes as well that I took. We had a couple classes, junior Bible seminar, senior Bible seminar, wonderful classes as well. It kind of makes you kind of evaluate what you believe. There's some other teachers, they had some of their classes, Bible doctrines 1 and 2, things like that. For my specific major, I think there was very helpful classes, the homiletics classes, which are basically how to preach. Some very helpful things, I think, just to be a public speaker, sort of a thing, some tips and things about how to run a service, how to run funerals, how to run things, as a typical pastor that you're going to have to run into through your pastoral career. Um, but I did have to take that Greek class, which again, unfortunately, I was not really too thrilled about. But I did ace that thing. I mean, I was 100% through that class. To me, I found a lot of similarities between that and the Spanish classes I'd taken as a public high school kid. And it's an interesting thing for me too, because really, to me, the Spanish language, the studying of the Spanish language, has become a huge love of mine, a huge hobby. Honestly, one of the greatest accomplishments that I can say I've ever done in my life is to become bilingual and learning the
Hmm.
Spanish language. And it's been a long process. Being an American, it's very hard to become bilingual. Obviously, as a public high school kid, the exposure is very limited, and I mean, I think probably very few people actually become proficient just from that exposure. But, when I was being a bus worker at Golden State Baptist College, we would have a ministry, we'd pick up disadvantaged kids, take them to church, and hopefully see them get led to the Christ, and basically kind of teach them a little bit about the Bible. So we would basically, that was my ministry that I was involved in. I was in a very Hispanic area for that ministry, and God just put it upon my heart. If I'm going to reach these kids, I have to be able to talk to their parents, and the kids could speak English. I mean, they were
Yeah.
raised bilingual, but the parents didn't speak, hardly anything more than just a few basic words in English. And they were very
Hmm.
skeptical when, a few white guys come to their door asking to
With a
take their
suit and tie, telling them you're going to take their kids for a day.
yeah, so it didn't fly over too well. So I said, I'm going to have to memorize some Spanish things, asking them, hey,
Yeah.
can I take your kids to church, give them a little presentation about what we're about? So I
Yeah.
took that basic that I learned as Spanish and as a high school kid. And I memorized some phrases, about how to, hey, I'm from the church. We want to pick up your kids. We'll take them back on the bus, and man, the parents loved it. I mean, after I started doing that, man, I had
Hmm.
such great success. I mean, I don't know if I was the biggest bus route in the college ministry, but for a time, our bus was definitely very large comparatively to other buses, and certainly maybe to other colleges, maybe not the biggest or whatever compared to them. But we were up to the point where we're taking between, our bus route, we had 2 buses on it. We're filling up over 120 kids, 120 adults, even including everyone there. And I mean, we're making a big difference. And again, I wouldn't say it was just me. I mean, we definitely had a team of bus workers as I was the bus captain there. But I mean, really, I have to say that was the biggest breakthrough, was when I started to speak Spanish a little bit and
Hmm.
to say, I have to memorize a little bit of Spanish so I can at least invite people to church. And man, God just started blessing that. And then, God opened doors. because I was willing to learn a little bit about that. And, that's kind of funny because that's one of the first conversations I had with my wife is that our college didn't have a ministry for our kids. Like I said, most of the Hispanic kids under the age of 5 or so that had not been exposed to school yet didn't speak any English yet. So they were still speaking Spanish. And, I ran to my wife. She was a church member there and she was helping out in her ministry. And I asked her, I know that you speak Spanish. And I said, can you try to work and help to get a Spanish class going? And she said, no, talk to Bible college about that because I have nothing to do about that. She said, we've already tried to do that, but the college didn't want to do that. And with their philosophy, I can understand what they're saying. They want the kids to be exposed to more English. I mean, English is the language in America. You have to speak
Yeah.
English. I truly firmly believe that. But, just in terms of the outreach and things, I felt like that was something that was important to have that as kind of a in-between phase while they're learning the language and things. But, that didn't really go off beyond that. But, my wife and I didn't end up talking much later for a couple of years after that first conversation. But I distinctly remember that conversation and, just how that went. It didn't really go over too well. That my wife was really kind of shooting me down there too. And, but my wife is Hispanic. She's Mexican. She grew up in a Spanish speaking family. And, that just kind of opened up the more doors. And that kind of went over my mother-in-law, so to speak, a little bit there because of the little bit of Spanish that I was able to kind of muster half-heartedly there from,
Hmm.
the little bit I could muster up there. And, so we ended up getting married and, as it would so be, still after the great financial crisis, all of the things, a lot of churches were struggling in America. I had this Bible college degree. I was a young guy wanting to get into the ministry, just working a secular job for a couple of years. So I found a church nearby us and they decided to move out there and said, hey, we're going to help this pastor. I know that they can't pay us. They can't do anything. I said, I can help in whatever way he needs me to be assistant pastor, to be a bus director, to be whatever he wants me to be pretty much. And I was just willing to
Hmm.
do anything. I just wanted to be in the ministry because I felt like that's what God had called me to do. So I said, whatever. So that pastor was not on board with it at all. He was very leery, very nervous. He'd had some bad experiences with other people just kind of doing what I wanted to do, just sort of showing up. He said, all right, you're going to have to wait a year before I'm going to let you do this because he'd had some really bad experiences with some situations. And I was
Wow.
like, all right, if that's what you want me to do. I said, all right, I'll wait. But it's funny because, it was probably only about maybe 4 or 5 months. He asked my wife to start getting involved in some ministries there, and it wasn't too much longer. I think that the barrier had been broken. I'd had enough influence on him that he was able to see, I was legitimate and wanting to help his church and was not wanting to take over or hurt him and hurt the
Hmm.
church or hurt the people or anything like that. And it was definitely not a full year that I waited there. But we were just church members. I mean, just doing the whole sewing thing. I mean, we're just involved in trying to share the gospel. Just involved in as much as we could be. He let me get involved in a couple ministries there. I mean, I was involved in a nursing home ministry. You and I had done that when I was a high school kid and things. And I mean, there's just trying to reach anyone I could. Um, so a couple
So
years
then,
later.
go ahead. I was just going to ask, how long were you there before the church opened up in Texas for you?
Yeah, so it was about 2 years that I was there, just kind of helping out. Just like I said, just being a regular church member. I mean, I was getting more involved as they, couple later towards the end of that period, and um, so I had a good friend in Bible college that had gone to this little church in Odem, Texas, and I was aware of that ministry that had been told about how things were going there. But he'd been there for 3 years at that point. That was his third year, so. I think there was a lot of things going on. I think there was a lot of difficult situations. I think that he just felt like it was time to leave. And, I think for him and his family, it was probably the right decision. I think for any pastor, honestly, it's a hard thing to say. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that disagree with me. But if you're hurting your family, it is time to leave the ministry. And I firmly
Hmm.
believe that. So, he stepped down, and I fully support that. Supported that then. I still support that now. I think it was the right decision for him. I think it was the right decision for the church. So he went back to his wife's ministry where she'd been raised at, and they got involved in the church ministry. They were there for a while, and they moved to another ministry now out of a different state, and they're still involved in church. But he knew me very well, and he recommended my name to the church because obviously they're going to be looking for a pastor. And he said, this guy believes very closely what I believe. He's a young guy. He's just married. They just had a brand new baby kid.
Hmm.
So take it for what it is. I guess not any experience per se as being a pastor, but he gave me a chance, and he
Sure.
pretty much gave me a good recommendation. Um, so the church called me down there. I candidated for the church. Everything went well. I think I was there for, I think, maybe 3 or 4 services. We had, Sunday, the Sunday school, Sunday morning, Sunday night. And I think I was there for like a special Tuesday or Monday potluck sort of a thing.
Hmm.
Met with the board, the deacons and things that were there. Then I think on Wednesday night I preached, and then my family left. So a couple of weeks later, I got a call back and said that they'd voted me in, that they wanted me and my family to come down there. So we moved down there, and everything
And
was going
what year
great.
was that? What year? How
That
long?
was October 2014.
So how long was that after you got out of Bible college?
So it was approximately, I think, 2.5 or 3.5 years, something like that. So yeah, I
Okay.
graduated, I think, in 2011. So
So
something
you
around
moved
there.
from California to Texas,
Yep.
and now you start as the head pastor for the first time in a little
Yep.
church in
So, like I
Texas.
said, there's a pretty small church, pretty small town. If for anyone that doesn't know where Odem, Texas is, you don't have to pull out a map. It's just north of Corpus Christi, Texas, which, if you don't know where that is, it's about halfway between Houston, Texas, and the southern border, just right along the Gulf Coast there. So, pretty small rural community. I think the town had maybe a couple thousand people in it, but again, we were kind of more of a suburb of Corpus Christi, really. So, I mean, there was definitely a larger city that was nearby. So everything was going great for the first 6 months. I mean, really not a lot of complaints. I mean, everything seemed to be going really well. New people started coming. They heard they got a new pastor. People were curious, wanted to check it out. People from other communities and just random people heard, hey, got a new pastor.
Hmm.
So I was pretty encouraged, pretty excited. And then we had a guest preacher and a singing group came by, and some things have been happening to the church floor, kind of near the center of the auditorium, and it was like, man, something's going on. And so somebody pointed out and said, "Hey, Pastor, the pew is raising into the air." And I looked down, and I was like, "The pew's not flying into the air; the floor is collapsing." So I took a good look at that, and was
Oh
like,
man.
it's like, yeah, something is definitely not right between, under the floorboards. So, we had the singing group and the pastor and, the preacher come through, and you're like, okay, well, we're going to have to fix this issue. Is like, I don't know what's going on. I hope the church floor doesn't collapse, but we're going to give it a shot. And I asked everybody, hey, let's sit on the right side of the auditorium, and we'll just
Yeah.
hopefully, pray to God that this doesn't collapse on
Wow.
us or anything. So, the next day, I think it was probably a Thursday or something, we got through there. Maybe it was a Monday. I can't remember. It was right after a church service the next day. And we're like, all right, team, I got a couple, 4 or 5, church members, and said, we're going to tear into this floor, see what's going on here. Cause obviously something's rotten, something's falling apart here. We got to fix this thing. So, I had no idea what I was getting into. I had no idea
Hmm.
at all. And man, just digging into that thing, rotten boards, the whole entire church auditorium had to be replaced, the entire flooring. And I was like, the more that we took out, the more it was like, this is incredibly discouraging. I mean, like the entire auditorium is gone. We're not going to have, in
Big
my mind, I
mess.
was like, we're not going to have a place to meet. So I was looking at it all, looking at how things were going. I was like, man. So we got to the point where it was like the pulpit area. And I was like, you know what? We tore this out all wrong. We had our piano, we had our organ, we had our baptistry, and all kinds of things that were on this platform area. It was like there is no way that we're going to be able to get this stuff out with this whole floor out. It was like this is going to be
Yep.
impossible. So I was like, whatever we do, we're going to have to save the platform. So
Oh man.
yeah, so it was a long process, and then there was a couple guys I have to say that gave me a hand periodically, but honestly, it was mostly me. Again, it's a small church, maybe 40 people, 50 people, 60 people on a very, very good day, a huge day, or something like that. So I mean, it's a small church, not
Yeah.
really that many people to help out, anyways, even if they wanted to, whatever. So,
Okay.
um,
So just for everyone listening, that means there was no maintenance department. That means there was no large fat bank account where you could just hire a general contractor and get them out there. And you weren't even a big enough church where you could just say, okay, everybody, I need to make an announcement. Out of the 500 people that we have here, I need a few of you to come and help to get this thing done. And you could
no,
have a dozen guys show up. It wasn't any of that. It was a
no.
church that on a good day had 50 people there, and you had a construction site where you probably needed 4 guys working, for a
Yep.
full week to fix
Oh
this
yeah.
problem.
Oh yeah. It was
Worst case
amazing.
scenario.
And again, I'm a Bible college graduate. I had no experience in construction at all. So I mean,
Wait,
yeah.
they didn't teach you framing and masonry? That you didn't Go back
Maybe
to
there's
your
some Bible
concrete
colleges that do, but
classes.
not the one I attended. So that's
That's
one
too
of the
bad.
ongoing jokes there. They didn't teach us that in Bible college. I think in the
Oh
past we've
yeah.
said that.
That's the phrase you write above your door or you keep on your desk. Well, they didn't teach us that in Bible college.
Yeah, exactly. So that was it. The honeymoon phase ended right then because
Hmm.
when some of our lead people came up and said, they were upset because I said, "Hey, we're gonna fix this ourselves because I'd already budgeted just the expense of the materials and things. Like we're barely going to be able to afford even the materials, let alone the labor.
Hmm.
Like you said, hiring a general contractor to me was out
Yeah.
of the question. A couple of the leading members like, Pastor, we need to get a loan on this. I'm like, this church cannot afford a $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 loan to fix this thing. Like, I'm sorry, that is out of the question. It's
Yeah.
like, I know what our tithes and offerings are. There's no way that we're going to be able to get that. I was like, forget it. So one of the members' wives came up and told my wife and said, my husband is not going to help at all with this project. So my wife
Great.
was like, all right, your husband's a big boy. He can do whatever he wants
Thanks.
to do. I mean, and it just goes to show, though, that she wasn't willing to confront me directly, or he wasn't willing to
Yeah.
confront me directly. It was going to go through my wife. And, that's a sad thing, too, because, again, my wife really did experience a lot of that kind of thing, a lot of the tension. I think a lot of pastors' wives do experience a lot of the brunt of what happens there. And, again, it's kind of
Yeah.
a bad thing both ways. And she hears the complaints from the church members and hears the complaints probably from her husband. Although, again, I try to be very careful with that. And I'm sure most pastors are trying to be conscientious of that. But it's a
Yeah.
hard thing to not take
Let
things
me
out.
jump in here. Let me jump in here. The only thing you should say to the pastor's wife is, I love you. I'm praying for you. Is there anything I can do to help you? That's it.
Exactly. Yep.
Anything outside of that, keep your mouth shut or talk to the pastor. She does not need, the stress of all the complaints, of the gossip, of all the stupid church members, who are too cowardly to just talk to the pastor about their issues so you can get an actual solution.
Yep.
Oh, it drives me nuts. And it's such a shame. It's nice to know that, California church members, Colorado church members, and Texas church members are the same.
Yeah.
There's some comfort in that.
All right. Now, I know we're on a timeline here. I don't know how long you want to keep on going or whatever, but I could probably
No,
go on
go
this.
ahead, man. Yeah, don't worry about. I don't care that we're at an hour. We have a little bit more stuff we want to get to. So you're pastoring down there now, Scott. What a lot of folks don't know is that you are not in Texas pastoring anymore, unless they read the description. I think it says the former pastor of the Church of Odem, Bible Baptist Church of Odem, Texas. So tell us about that. You're not in the ministry right now. You are back in California. What happened? Why did you end up giving up the church? Bring us around to that point in the story.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Like I said, the honeymoon kind of ended there about that 6 month point. And I mean, I want to say there's wonderful people there, wonderful things happened. I mean,
Sure.
honestly, a lot of people got saved, and I could say a lot of positive things about that experience as well. But it was definitely not all positive. And I think probably most pastors and probably anyone that's been in the ministry for any length of time could say it's not always going to be a bed of roses. I mean, there's some
Hmm.
thorns mixed in there as well. But I think that there was just a lot of tension. It was just that it's not that we had any major growth of doctrine. I think for the most part, our doctrine is pretty similar. I think that a lot of the things were more directional. And, my direction was very different, let's say, than most of the members, and especially certain key members. And, it's interesting because I had basically a small group of people that really wanted to dictate the direction of the church. And it became very clear that they were very against the things that I was not that I was doing. I mean, they weren't necessarily against those kind of things, but I'll just give you a couple of examples. One thing that really,
Sure.
I came back from a missions trip and I had not gotten sleep for over 24 hours because of the flights and time zones and all the kind of things or whatever that's involved in international travel. And this family that I put in charge of the church while I was gone, we were remodeling our prophet's chamber as kind of like a small little studio apartment. We were going to be having an assistant pastor come in. He was going to be living there and he needed some work. And, I had previously, before I left on this missions trip, bought a washer and dryer that we're going to be installing in this missions room. And, again, I think the lack of sleep was a huge factor to this about why I was so frustrated. But again, there was a lot of tensions, a lot of, conflict in terms of the direction that I was having things. And I came back and my wife had said, hey, this person that was in charge there, they didn't like the washer and dryer that you had bought. And I mean, they were a used washer and dryer, but I tested and made sure that they worked and they were fine, but they said, they decided to get a more compact version. It was like the above one that had the washer dryer combo. So it was going to
Hmm.
save space in the square footage. And, of course it costs more money. So, I mean, I went from like maybe a $200 purchase to like a $600 or $700 purchase, which again, maybe to you and your family, it's not a lot of money, or maybe it is, I don't know. But for our church budget, I knew
Yeah.
that was going to be a big expense. So I was furious just because I had already in my mind taken care of that problem. And they took it in their minds because they felt like this 4 square feet of living space was going to be that valuable that they just basically walked all over that decision. I had already resolved that problem. And it was just like, okay, so, to me, it was just like they just don't want to. And again, it's not anything that was like majorly doctrinal or things, but it was just like
Sure.
a bunch of little things. And it was kind of like the straw that kind of, broke the camel's back, as they say, sort of thing. Just kind of adds up. And, days went past and I kind of, prayed through that, got over that a little bit and said, okay, maybe I'm just in the flesh. I said, I'll just let the church family have their way with that, and sold the other washer and dryer that I got, let them win on that situation. A few maybe months later or something like that, we had bought a bunch of new pew chairs. Unfortunately, our church had beautiful pews. But during the construction process, we ended up having no place to store that many pews, and we had to put them outside. And unfortunately, because of how long it was and the humidity in Texas and things, the pews all got damaged, and we had to buy pew chairs, which unfortunately just the cost and things like that. That's how it went. So we bought, enough for the whole church plus extra in case we needed more and things get damaged or whatever. So we had plenty of pew chairs and things. And this family had donated a bunch of chairs for the choir, and I was not aware that they had donated that out personally or whatever. They had literally, bought these special musical looking chairs that looked like harps. The back of the design, wooden, a very, very, I would say, I don't know, ornate kind of a thing. And I just was like, I prefer to have more of the same pew chair going throughout the auditorium. So I put those cheap pews in storage and put the other kind of pew chairs in a place, the choir loft. And boy, were they furious. I mean, they were absolutely livid that I had taken those chairs, those precious chairs they had bought, and put these other chairs that were worthless to their mind. And it was just like a huge, huge issue, like way bigger of a deal than it ever should have been. But it was just like, a ton of things just like that. It's like, what color that auditorium was. I'd painted it one color and it became a big old issue. So they ended up having us repaint the whole entire auditorium. I mean, it's just, just one thing after the other. So again, just after so much of that, you can only take so much of that. But, that wasn't the only thing, going through all of that. I was having anxiety issues. Again, I was gaining a lot of weight through that. And again, I'm still in the process of losing weight at this point. My blood pressure was getting out of control and just not healthy for myself, not healthy for my wife. She could tell I was very stressed out all the time. On top of, having a church, I'd been bivocational too. So, I mean, through a lot of this time I was working, and then my wife was working, and then I was working. And, my wife was feeling a lot of the stress too, being in an area where we're pretty much like almost on the missions field. We're in Texas. I mean, I know it's America, but we didn't have any family there. I mean, yeah, we had friends in terms of the church, but we didn't have any other friends from like Bible college that were there. We didn't have any other people that we knew that were there. And sure, some people visited us that we knew and things like that. But I mean, it wasn't like, we could just have them watch our kids for a few hours or something like that. I mean, it was very, very difficult situation having young children. I mean, I know that was definitely a problem. I know a lot of young pastors go through that same heartache. I know a lot of pastors might, if they're young pastors like we were having young family, might have their family to help them out or something like that. Just from my own personal experience, I would really recommend a pastor not, if they're a young pastor having kids or planning to have more kids, don't take a pastor in a place that's far away from your family or from your wife's family or something like that. And it's not because that God's not calling you to a place that's far away from them or something like that, but at least have a plan for childcare, because you need a break sometime. And I think, it's one of those things you really take for granted, especially if you have more than one, 2 kids, because as soon as you get to having the third kid, they're like, okay, you can only have 2 kids at the doctor's office before, they'll say you can't have any more kids here for this ear infection. They're going to check out. So you got to find childcare at some point. And, it just becomes a problem. And, and again, my wife was breastfeeding, and, that's a whole other ordeal right there for anyone that has done that experience. It is a whole thing. And, we don't have really a lot of support for those type of things in America. And people thought we were weird and it was crazy, very looked down upon, didn't get a lot of support from that aspect. and really it's a life commitment, but from the mother to do that. And we're doing the whole like changing the diapers. We weren't using the disposable kind, we're using cloth diapers. I mean, that's a lot of
Hmm.
process, and there's a whole lot of things that we're trying to do with the kids. And my wife was feeling a lot of pressure. She just pretty much had like, I would say, an emotional nervous breakdown sort of a thing, and she really had to go to a place to get some help.
Yeah.
And it was a hard thing for me to really admit, but things just were not right. Things were not going well in her mind. Things were very stressed out. We just had our third child, and I mean, she was very emotionally up and down and all kinds of the place. She was saying things that were very bizarre, telling church members sort of things, calling them at random times and telling them odd things, just very, very unusual behavior. And then she went through a period that she was not sleeping for like 4 or 5 days, and it was just causing all sorts of like delusions and things like that. And it was just like,
Yeah.
okay, we got to get you some help here. Like, this is a serious
And Scott,
issue.
and Scott, let me jump in. There's nothing wrong with any of that. Okay. All of us are going to be, sick and well at different times in our life. And it'll be physically, and it'll be emotionally, and it'll be spiritually. And for some reason, folks that haven't gone through that, they have no idea, what it's like. And unfortunately, in Christianity, everyone seems to have this idea of like, if you just fake a happy face, then everything is fine. But that's not the truth. There's stress, there's anxiety, there's depression. Those things are real. And unfortunately, there's too many people in Christianity that don't want to face those, and they want to just pretend they're not real. They want to ignore them. And that only makes everything worse, and the best thing you can do is, uh, admit it and deal with it head on, and you can get the help you need. And sometimes that's difficult, but unfortunately, I know people in ministry that don't want to admit or deal with problems they're having with their kids. People have substance abuse problems, people have issues. Just because you're a Christian, there's no switch that you flip where everything in life is great and you don't struggle with anything. That's not the case. We're still humans. It's the real world, and it's a shame, that people can't, kind of rally together and give people the support they need. Now, here's another thing I want to add. Scott's been talking about some of the struggles that they went through, and I need to remind everybody, your pastor, whoever they are, and this is going to account for 98 out of 100 pastors, are way underpaid. Okay. They do an amount of work for an amount of money that none of us would be okay with. Okay.
The
We
thing
would
too is that
all
they're
quit
on
the
call
job and
all the
find
time.
someplace
If
else.
anything
Yes.
happens, I mean,
Yep.
at the drop of a hat. I mean, I was there. A church member was on life support,
Yep.
and I mean, I was working my secular job, and I told my boss, "Hey, I'm sorry, I
Look,
gotta
I
go."
gotta go. This guy might die. Yeah. And another thing that Scott didn't bring up yet is that he lived in a church parsonage. So for those of you that don't know what that is, a lot of times, especially a smaller church, they will build a home on the property for the pastor to stay in. And they'll usually do that because they don't have the money to pay the pastor what they need to pay him so that he can buy a home and have a mortgage. So instead, what they end up doing is they have a parsonage. Well, I don't know a single pastor that likes that. Not one, because then you are there nonstop. And even when the church doors are closed, people are like, oh, let me just go bother the pastor. And they'll walk over to the house and knock on the door no matter what day it
It's
is,
like,
no
"Hey,
matter what
pastor, I
time
forgot
it
my
is.
keys. I'm here to clean
Yeah.
the church." And
And if you're not there, they're bugging your wife, and she has newborns and she's trying to get them to take a nap. And if any woman who is serious about nursing, and going the route of breastfeeding, that there's a schedule involved. Okay. It's an ordeal. Multiple kids that are in diapers. It's so much work. It's insane. Then trying to get them to eat on a schedule, sleep on a schedule, so that you're not just going crazy is difficult. And Scott knows, he and I both have a lot of kids that are close in age. I have 6. Scott, do you have more than 4 now, or are you just
yeah,
up
we
to,
have
you have
three.
4? You have
No, we
3.
have 3 kids. Yep.
Man, why did I think you had four? Okay, forgive me. So we've both been there, and it is a lot. And like I said, Scott wasn't getting paid enough. And I don't know how much he was getting paid, but I know for a fact that a church of 50 people doesn't bring in enough money to give a guy, a single income family, enough money to have, any kind of a real life that we would accept. So he was working, a part-time job so that he could be a pastor basically as a hobby, and it is difficult. So just like I told everyone, when you go to the pastor's wife, you need to tell her you love her, you're praying for her, and can I be a help in any way? And other than that, just shut up. And honestly, you really need to do the same thing with the pastor. I mean, people have no idea what a pastor of a small church does and how much work they put in to try to help the people and make this thing work. I will just repeat it one last time. No one in your church would do that much work for that little pay ever. Everyone would quit that job and find another job because it's just ridiculous. You end up doing it because you love God and you want to serve God, and that's why you're there. That's it. If that's not your motivation, you're never going to even try to get into ministry and pastor a church. And I say it all the time. I would not wish pastoring a church on my worst enemy. And don't get me wrong, Scott and I can both tell you lots of stories of wonderful times being a pastor. And it's wonderful to see someone get saved and baptized. It's wonderful to see families change their life and discover who Christ is and get into the Bible. Those are all wonderful things. And that's why we do it. But it's also very difficult because you're there to help broken people. So it is a lot. Okay, so Scott, you're at a point where you really have too much going on in your personal life. You need to attend to your wife, and she's going through a hard time, and you have too much going on with the church, and you also have to work a second job to be able to support all of that. And finally, it's too much. There's not enough hours in the day to be able to do it all. And go ahead. What's the decision?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing because after my wife sort of had her nervous breakdown, sort of a thing, there was a running out with the probably the biggest blessing, but also the biggest kind of, I would not say, difficulty family, and they left the church. And I'll have to tell you, it was like a breath of fresh air just hit the congregation. I mean, just wonderful things started happening. People that had been sitting on the pews, not doing anything, were getting involved, wanting to play instruments and getting involved in ministries. And it was just like they had been basically shutting down anyone's willingness to do anything for the church. So, I mean, it
Isn't
was
that
like really a
amazing?
breath of fresh air had hit the church. I mean, I think that they had seen that we were going through a hard time as well. And I think that it really did, add a lot to that. They were finally stepping up in really maybe
Yeah.
some ways that it would have been nice for them to step up earlier.
Yeah.
But again, I understand everybody has different things going in their lives. And again, like you said, I don't think that any church member would do what a pastor does for what they get paid. So,
Yeah.
um, but I'd switched to another part-time job. I mean, it was still, within my hours and things, not going to really conflict with my duties as a pastor. And, it was, giving me some more time to think. And a buddy of mine from Bible college had a business, and he said, "Hey, my operations manager just quit on me." He was really more just complaining than I would then say looking for somebody to fill in. I mean, I don't think he was thinking of me to fill that role, but basically it was like, I asked him, "Hey, is there a way that you would let me apply for that job or whatever? Because,
Mhm.
I'm looking to change my location here." And he said, "Let me think about it." And, a couple weeks later, I think I flew out there and, you know, for a week, and everything went really well with that particular job. And so he extended the job offer to me. And it was just, I think, a good time for us to move. And then later on, and probably about a year after that, my wife's sister ended up having a very traumatic illness, very serious illness, lost both of her arms, both of her legs, and is currently handicapped. I mean, it's very, very intense situation. She's living with us now at this point. So she's a young girl. She's only going to be 22 this month.
Wow.
So, I mean, doesn't have hands, doesn't have feet. She was in the hospital during all of this COVID madness. I mean, she couldn't have any visitors except for her mother, who was basically living there for days at a time because they wouldn't let her in and out. It was just madness. I mean, it was just a really good thing that I would say our family was here to be here during that time for this period of transition. And I think there really was God's leading in that. But I think it was also a good time for our family. I mean, we still have very small kids. I mean, my youngest is 3 years old and my oldest is going to be 8. I mean, they're getting a little bit older. They're, learning and able to do some things, put on their own shoes, put on their own clothes and things. And
But still very young. Yeah, they're not doing the dishes and cooking meals yet. Yeah, there's still a lot of work there. Those are your young kids.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a hard thing to say what's going to happen here in the future, but I mean, currently, I told my wife too, I'm not looking to even get really involved in the church that we're attending.
Hmm.
But like I said, one thing that for me is a huge thing is the Spanish language. And like I was talking to you before, like really just being in Bible college that gave me a passion for that. So again, my wife being Hispanic and speaking Spanish, I was able to practice a little bit, but she would just get frustrated mostly with me. And she did not want to speak to me in Spanish because she didn't have the patience for when I'm trying to have a conversation with her. I didn't have the vocabulary to
Yeah.
have any kind of a meaningful conversation. So she just didn't want to waste her time with that. So really, it wasn't until my oldest daughter was born that really I made a decision there. And I was in my study. I was reviewing some of my notes from Bible college just a few months after I'd moved to Odem. And, I was going through my Greek class and thinking, man, this is going to be so awesome if I can review some of these notes and see what applies here. And I was like, probably gone through most of the class already at that point. And I was like, why am I learning Greek? Why am I trying to teach myself Greek? I was like, I already know the basics to Spanish and I can actually see people saved. I was like,
Hmm.
nobody speaks Greek. I mean, even
No.
especially Koine Greek, it's nobody
Yeah.
knows, even Greek people in Greece don't even know that language. I'm like, am I going to be wasting my time studying another language when I have God's word in the English language? I'm like, it just doesn't make sense. I was like, you know what? I might as well be investing my time trying to see people saved. I was
Hmm.
like, I have a daughter that is half Mexican, and I'm like, she should be able to speak to her grandparents in Spanish.
Sure.
So to me, I was like, this is going to be my mission. I'm going to start to learn Spanish, really. I mean, like to try to become bilingual.
Yeah.
And, I started to learn it. I started to, use what I knew talking to my daughter. My daughter wasn't complaining and being impatient that I didn't know what a certain word was or how to say certain things because she was just learning how to speak herself. So I
Yeah.
would remember being at the park and I'll be there with Google Translate. I'll open on my phone, like pointing at a bug and saying, that's what this is, and looking at what this is. And I was just tell her, like, this is what lake means. That's what a caterpillar is. That's what a bird is. And I was just looking all these things up. And I started to learn more and more. And, really, honestly, truly, the biggest thing that before I left Texas, the biggest reason why I left, and again, the reason why I was even considering that job opportunity that popped up was because one of my members was having his fiance come down from another city, and she was a Spanish speaking woman, didn't speak any English, and I was like, I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to see, my
Uh-huh.
Spanish is not great, but I'm going to try to preach in both languages. I'm going to try
Sure.
to preach partly in Spanish, partly in English. And I was like, this is just going to be a one-time thing. I mean, if she moves down here, they get married, or, we can have actual Spanish ministry for this woman and,
Hmm.
try to, start a Spanish ministry. I mean, it's Texas. There's Spanish people speaking people
Sure.
there. So I was like, this is just going to be a one-time service. I'm going to try to do half in Spanish and half in English. I'm going to say whatever I have to say in English and translate into Spanish. And man, word got out probably like a week before that I was planning on doing this. And man, that ruffled some feathers. And I mean, after the
Really?
family that had already left, that had been kind of causing some issues, my, stress, the few gray hairs that I have, I was like, this is not worth it. I did
Hmm.
that. I did preach that message. I was like, this is not going to be how I'm going to be preaching every message. This is just like a
Hmm.
one-time thing because we had this guest who I knew already beforehand was not going to understand English. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is not going to be how every service is going to go, but
Sure. We're going to try this.
we're going to try this. And I mean, from everyone that spoke both languages that was bilingual, that they said, hey, you did a great job, Pastor. And, we understood you in both languages. And I mean, I had
Yeah.
really studied and put a lot of time and effort into it.
Sure. It's
And
great.
I mean, I know that that's very frustrating to listen to, but it's just like, hey, it's just a one-time thing. It's like, she's not going to get any spiritual benefit out of it if I don't do something like that.
Sure.
So
If you don't try, what's the point? Scott, it is so funny because you and I both know missionaries that are in other countries that only have dirt floors in their church. They have no air conditioning and they live on the equator. It is insane what real Christians go through all around the world, and you're trying to help someone out. And it's just so frustrating that people only see the side of, well, I'm moderately inconvenienced here, so I'm going to complain about it. I mean, come on, man. Like, I thought we're all supposed to be a family and a team, and we're
Well,
all,
it's funny because like our church supported Mexican missionaries that only spoke
sure.
Spanish, and would have a translator that would translate for them, and they didn't have a problem with that. But it's when their pastor gets up there and starts translating
Yeah.
himself, that's when the problem is happening. So, I mean, I don't know if I had had somebody else to translate for me that would have been different or something. So, it was like that couple of week period between get that whole thing had happened. A lot of people had got their feathers ruffled, didn't like that idea, really came down on me like, you shouldn't be doing that sort of thing. I was like, I don't want to go through this whole thing again. I'm like, if that lady moves down here, we're definitely starting a Spanish ministry. And I had a man in mind that I was going to have him do, some kind of a something with that. It wasn't going to be me or whatever, but it was just like to me, it was just like, these people don't even want to spiritually help people that need help. Like legitimately, this is a need. She's not going to understand anything in English. So, to me, just kind of said where the heart of the church was at that point, and at least some of the members. I was just like, I don't want to go through this, journey again. So to me, between the difficulties I had with the direction of the church, with other people following and different things with my family going on, it was just like, it's the time to leave. So,
yeah,
it's
terrible. Sorry, it's terrible that you didn't have a great experience down there, because you and I have both been a part of, different churches together. I've been out to the church where you went to Bible college and where you're attending North Valley Baptist Church now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been to their Bible conferences. I've seen their Bible college. I've met the pastor there. I was out there for your wedding, and you and I were, members of a church here in Grand Junction where we both served. And we've both been around a lot of churches that were wonderful and we enjoyed going there. And don't get me wrong, there were still problems, but the people were, kind of all on board and going in the same direction. And there is something different about starting a church and taking over a church. And you're not the first pastor I talked to where there's another pastor that that I talked to that took over a church. And he was joking with me. He's like, Patrick, I had to wait years before I could change the paper towels in the men's room, because they're like, we've always had that paper towel dispenser. And it's like, folks, come on. Like, you're getting a new pastor. Some things are going to change. It's not like he started teaching that baptism saves you. He just, he's like, the carpet has holes in it. We need to replace the carpet. And everyone's like, oh, we can't get carpet of a different color, and it's just like, guys, come on. I don't know the solution to it, but I've heard that problem before. And if anyone out there is in a church where your pastor's getting old and you're going to bring in a new pastor, or your pastor has died or he retired or whatever, it's a transition, and you got to decide to get on board and support the pastor in whatever direction he's going. Because if you don't, there's going to be conflict and the church isn't going to move forward, and it's going to cause problems for everyone. And sometimes if you can't get on board with the new pastor, maybe you need to find a church where you can.
And that's a great suggestion right there. I wish more people would take advantage of that. It's not a bad thing to leave a church. It's not
no, it would be better to do that than to stay there for years, causing problems and fighting everything. Yeah, just leave and on good terms and wish them well. And then, you can even say, hey, there's a great church over here. I used to go there, and we go over here now because it's closer to where I live, but you should try that one. That's a great little church right there. And let me ask you this, Scott, because you saw new people come to your church. You saw new people get saved. You saw families get added to the church. If you had to say where the problems came from, were the majority of the problems from the new people that got saved and got on board, or were the majority of the problems from the old people that you inherited?
100% the old people that we inherited. Our church is now 52 years old, I think, whenever I came there. So like you said, it's a famous saying that it's easier to give birth than to resurrect the dead. And with churches, that really is the case. If you're a pastor and, you think for all that thing, it's like you don't want to start a church because you're going to have to be in some school cafeteria paying rent and sitting up and breaking down every day.
Yeah.
it's going to be a whole lot less heartache to probably do that in most cases. I mean, sure, there's probably the exception, but I mean, for the most
Yeah.
case, for most churches, it is a blessing to have a building. It's a blessing to have a property. It's a blessing to
Yeah.
have a church and building that's paid for. But man, there was a lot of upkeep. I didn't know anything about construction, but man, I could definitely be a handyman today if I wanted to.
Yeah.
That was my occupation because there's literally so much that I did. I mean, we're ripping out walls. I mean, we're putting
Yep.
in, new wiring,
Re-roofing
sheets out of
thing.
water
Oh
heater,
yeah.
all kinds of stuff,
Everything.
drywall, whatever you name it. We were doing that flooring. I mean, all sorts of stuff. And I mean, it's just, a big learning experience. And especially again, coming from somebody that didn't have necessarily that a background in that, it's, I would say, a huge challenge for probably most pastors too.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I was there for just under 5 years. It was 4 years and 11 months, I believe exactly. So just under 5 years. And, I think to me, that big point was that the previous couple pastors had only been there for less than 5 years. And one of the previous pastors that I'd talked to from one of my days when I was attending church, said, it takes about 7 years for the church to really get on board with you, to, like you said, just really follow and everything. I was, really shooting. I really wanted that as a goal, to see if something would change at that 7 year point, but I didn't even quite get to that 5 year point before. It was just like, I'm done here. The church and I are not going the same direction at all. It's time for them to get another pastor. And praise God, they got another pastor. They got another wonderful man. I knew him and his wife from before. He was pastoring another church in the area. But the church was not running very many people, just maybe one or two people that were coming and just having a lot of hard times. He decided to step down, and he went back to his hometown in a different state. And I mean, he was available. And when the church called him up, he said, I'll go down and candidate. And praise God, I mean, it's working out. He's been there for a couple, 2.5 years now, something like that. And I mean, I'm excited for them. I think he's doing a better job than I was. I mean, he's at a different point in his life. His family's a little bit more grown, a little bit older, more mature. He'd been a pastor before, so, he kind of had a little bit more experience. That's one of the questions I was asked all the time. It didn't matter if it was a visitor, didn't matter if it was a guest pastor. They'd always ask this one question to me: "Is this your first ministry?" And I looked, every minute of my age. I was a 28-year-old kid when I went there, pretty young. So I mean, I looked very young when I went there, and of course it was my first ministry. So I'd never pastored a church before that. So that was the question that everybody wanted to know. But it's interesting to me because they were all like, "Is this your first?" So the implication that there's going to be a second or a third or a fourth, and for most pastors it is. And I can't say for every situation, everything, but again, it's not that there's a bad thing for that either, because every situation is different. Sometimes people are called to different places and different things. I would kind of compare the phase that I'm in right now a little bit to the wandering the wilderness for the people of the children of Israel. I'm sure that they feel like it was a big waste of time. And I mean, I'm not really like super involved in my church really at this point. I'm still going, Sunday school, Sunday morning, Sunday night, and whenever I get the opportunity. But I mean, it's not like I'm teaching a class. I'm not, and we're really involved in any other kind of outreaches or ministries or anything like that. But to me, it's like, I had a church member that was, that his family had been hurt by another very well-known ministry in the area. There was a men's home that was ran by a very well-known preacher, and just got burned. I mean, just really, it's a sad thing to see. But the ministry will tear people up, destroy families, destroy people if you'll let it. And his family just got to the point, we can't lose our family. We're just going to leave. So just horrible things that happened. They were treated, I think terribly in some ways, so, but that they never wanted to get involved in anything. I was just trying to be a blessing and a help to them, encouragement. But that's, they were just kind of waiting and just kind of just soaking it in, just kind of being, I think it helped a little bit. But, unfortunately to me, I didn't want to get really right involved again to do anything. I feel a desire that I'm going to probably start getting involved here again pretty soon. And hopefully maybe get more involved in the ministry, start doing some kind of things. But I'm definitely not going to hop right back into the pastor. I'm not going to hop into any kind of thing. But I am involved in the Spanish ministry in terms of going to that. And again, that was a big thing to me. That is a big thing. And again, coming to the particular job I'm at, most of the people speak Spanish. So I'm able to practice my Spanish. I've been going to the Spanish ministry at North Valley Baptist Church. And I've been getting, I would say, pretty much what people would say bilingual in Spanish and English. So I think, in my future, if God allows, I'd like to see that there's a ministry at a Spanish church, or maybe starting a Spanish ministry at an English church, or maybe, doing something with my Spanish, because again, it's not, everybody that speaks two languages. Certainly in America, it's a pretty rare thing. There's such a need for preachers, certainly there are pastors and things that are bilingual and other ministries that are Spanish speaking ministries and things like that. But I know I could probably name a half dozen churches off the top of my head that don't have a Spanish ministry, that need a Spanish ministry, but they just don't have anybody to do that. And, I
Hmm.
think that for myself in the future, maybe as my kids get a little bit older, like I said, for the people that were wandering the wilderness for the 40 years with Moses, thinking it was a waste of time. In some ways, I kind of do feel that way to an extent. But during that time, they raised the next generation of kids that were going to go in and conquer the promised land. So it wasn't a complete waste. They taught those kids about how to serve God, even if
Hmm.
it wasn't always by faith. That sometimes don't do what I did. And sometimes,
Hmm.
you've got to learn some lessons. And sometimes you got to, I think get your kids a little bit older. And especially for myself, I think that was definitely a big hindrance in my ministry as well. Not that it was a bad thing to have young kids or to be a young pastor. I definitely don't think that's a bad thing. And for any potential church member that's thinking, oh, should I have this young pastor come, that he might have kids or they already have very young kids? That's not a bad thing. But just know and be aware that if they have young kids, that you're going to have to help them out. And I mean, legitimately be there and say, hey, pastor, it's a Friday night. I'm going to watch your kids. I'm going to volunteer to babysit your kids for a date night. Go take your wife
Hmm.
out. Go get an ice cream or go do something fun. Go to play miniature golf and do something with your wife. And I think
Hmm.
that would just be a huge blessing, especially if they do have a young pastor like that. And probably any pastor would be a blessing. But I think that's something that, especially if your pastor has gone from another part of the country or another, even another city within that's a far away distance, that the family can't help them out. Take some extra care and try to help out your pastor in that way. Certainly for me, as my kids get older, I can see that there's going to be more opportunities that I'd be more open to that. I think that there's some learning that I've done over the years about how to manage my anxiety about the things that with my wife. I mean, we've been married almost 11 years now. It's a learning process for anyone being married. And certainly, the more years that you have being married, the more that you can help married couples and you can, so, just be an encouragement to them. And I think that's a big part, as being a pastor, as being a role model and an example in that area of helping families, helping married couples and things too. So I think that there's definitely some growing and things that's definitely taken place. And like I said, I do plan to, as in the near future, get more involved in things, even in my current local church that I'm attending. But I don't know what God has for me, and I think it'd be a lie for anybody to say I'm planning for sure to do this, unless it's like in the very near future, like within the next couple months, for somebody to say, "Bless God, I'm going to start a church or something." I mean, I have no idea what God would have, but am I willing to do that? I think I am. I mean, I don't feel like I was burned so bad. I don't think that it was such a horrible experience that I would say that I would never do it again. But like you said, I might be more inclined to say, okay, I'm going to start a Spanish ministry at an English speaking church, or I'm going to start a church that I can teach in English for one service and then Spanish in another, hour, or do some kind of a thing like that. I mean, one of the biggest blessings that I had as a pastor, we had an outreach ministry basically similar to Reformers Unanimous, which I know that you're familiar with, but basically it's reaching addicts, people that are struggling with alcohol, substance abuse, and things like that. And it was a state mandated program that there was not necessarily for like religious things to be involved with it, but they allowed us to go through as part of the punishment that they allowed us to preach to the people that were there. It was basically a minimum security prison. We'd go in there every week and we'd have more people there than my church services. I mean, people were hungry for the gospel. I mean, they wanted to get
Yeah.
saved. They wanted to hear what God had for them. And I mean, I think I had more people saved in that ministry than ever got saved at our church or through our vacation Bible schools or anything else that we're doing. And I mean, you know, it's an amazing thing. There's a lot of people out there that are looking for God if you'll just be willing to search for them. So, just I think that there's a lot of opportunities. And again, like I said, I think that God is putting in my heart to reach out to people. And again, like I have a spiritual gift. Really, I mean, the gift of tongues is not talking
Hmm.
gibberish. It's to be speaking a known language. To me, I mean,
Yep.
I do speak two known languages, and I can help people and see people saved in both of those languages, and be a blessing and a help. And maybe one day be a pastor. I mean, I do have all of the ministry experience. I mean, there's no sin or anything that would just cause me to not be in the ministry. It would just be that I have the desire God is wanting me to do. And I mean, I don't believe that that gift or that calling has been taken away. I still can teach. I can still preach the word of God. And I mean, it
Hmm.
just that it has to be the right, I guess, timing. And again, you could say, well, what are you waiting for? Well, I don't know. It's one of those things. You just want to wait on God's timing, God's will, God's leading, but it's not yet. But maybe in the sometime in the near future, I mean, I could see something else happening. Just what the Lord has and the Lord's timing.
The Lord's timing is an important thing, and far too many Christians look at waiting as a bad thing. But what you find is that God had Moses, you know, in a position where he wasn't being used as the great prophet of God for 40 years. He left Egypt and he went back again when he was 80. And like you said, the children of Israel in the wilderness. And it's easy for people to look at any missionary that comes off the field, any pastor that gives up his church, and to mark that as a negative and say, oh, that's a terrible thing. And it's like, well, no, not necessarily. The fact is, God has a place that he wants us. And it's nice when it's a clear, straight line from birth till death, but that's not the case for most of us. And so long as the Christian is willing to be used of God, that's all God's looking for, is just someone that's willing. That it's like, hey, God, I'm here, send me. That's all that the Lord needs. And I think a lot of people, because Scott, my story as well. I mean, we only started our church 2 years ago. And prior to that, I had a period of kind of, I'll say, wandering in the wilderness for many, many years, where we weren't sure how God was going to use us. We weren't sure what the next step was. I dead sure did not think it was going to be starting a church. And all we did was we found a church where we felt comfortable that we could bring our kids. We were studying the Bible. We participated in Sunday school, and we did what we could, but we also weren't forcing the situation. I wasn't trying to become something more than I felt God wanted. For us, we were making sure that our family was strong and healthy. We were taking care of things at home. I was self-employed. And then
I
God
remember your
opened the
family was
door.
going through a lot right then. I mean, you guys were
Oh
super
man.
busy. And I mean, like the
Yeah.
pastor kept on throwing more stuff on you. And you're like, Pastor, I'm already involved in the soul winning ministry. I'm involved in the
Yeah.
Reformed the choir.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yeah.
music ministry. I mean, it was just
Everything.
like the list was like ridiculous. Like,
Yeah.
and you want me to do extra stuff? It was like,
Yeah.
Pastor, no, it's like, it's just too much.
Yeah. And that's okay. I look back on my life and what I went through, which were some hard years and some difficult, awkward experiences. And I look back on them as I learned a lot. I learned what to do and not to do as a pastor. I learned about a lot about God and how he deals with the individual Christian. And while I was going through the situation, it wasn't comfortable. It wasn't easy. It was awkward and difficult and sad and lonely, with times of wonder where God showed himself that he's still there and he loves me just as much. And unfortunately, I think it's just too easy for a lot of us, like I said, to take the missionary that needs to come off the field, to take the pastor that needs to step down from his church and mark it off as a negative. And it's like, well, God is doing something here. And maybe what we need to do is just step back and trust that God's in charge, okay, and pray for the people we know and love and try to support them in any way we can. And then we're going to turn around and, how many people would have looked at Moses and said, wait a minute, you were next in line to be Pharaoh? You were his grandson? Is that right? And you were chased out of the country as a murderer. And we would look at that as like, boy, did you mess up? Now you're tending sheep on the side of a mountain in the middle of nowhere. And we would laugh at Moses. And I don't doubt that he was made fun of or people rolled their eyes at him, more than once. And he ended up being used in amazing ways of God. I don't know if you remember the fellow's name, Edward Kimball. Edward Kimball was a Sunday school teacher that felt like he never did anything for the Lord. And he was burdened to lead one person in his Sunday school class that he had a bunch of kids in. He wanted to lead one of them to Christ. So he went to this guy's place of business where this kid was working. It was a shoe store in Chicago, and he led D.L. Moody to Christ, and D.L. Moody got saved. And that's all we ever hear about with Edward Kimball. He never felt like he, did anything amazing for God, but the guy that he led to the Lord, is responsible for literally hundreds of thousands of people getting saved, and just amazing things happening. And it's too bad that someone might look at Edward Kimball's life and say, oh, that guy never really did much. He only saw one guy saved in his whole life. But God used him. God had a plan. And I hate to say this, but Edward Kimball, when I see him in heaven, he's going to have a much longer line than I will of people that want to thank him for leading D.L. Moody to the Lord, because they got saved from a D.L. Moody campaign.
Yeah, I can't
And
remember how many other preachers came out of that, but I mean, like, he started the Moody Bible
uh,
Institute, and like,
Billy Sunday. Billy Sunday was in the line of succession of people getting saved, and keep going down, Billy Graham.
Yep.
So if you go through and you see who got saved at a D.L. Moody revival, and then who got saved under that preacher and who got saved under that preacher, you find Billy Sunday and Billy Graham. So I mean, honestly, I hate to say it, but you could say that a good portion of the world got saved because of Edward Kimball, this guy that led one person to the Lord. But anyway, the point is, we are never a failure in God's eyes. Paul went to Jerusalem, even though the Holy Spirit told him many times not to go, and he was thrown in prison for a few years, and he suffered some major setbacks, but it doesn't matter. He was faithful to the Lord. He worked as hard as he could. So did all the other apostles, making big bonehead mistakes along the way, and God still used them. So it's, Scott, you're still one of my best friends. I still call you for advice when I have things going on in my life or in my church. And I'm like, man, I wonder how I'm supposed to deal with this, and I'll call you and get your take on it. And you've helped me a lot. And I know you're helping people out there at North Valley Baptist Church right now. And the fact is, you're still a young man. You still got a lot of years of doing something for God, and who knows what it's going to be, but maybe this is just the period of time where God needs you to focus a little bit more on your family. Like you said, I mean, look at the timing of it. You ended up going back to California. Your wife was able to get the help that she needed, and she's doing better. And then right after that, her family, her sister, had just this big upheaval, this catastrophe that happened. And you guys were able to be there for that and support your family through that. And I see the fingerprints of God on that, even though it was a difficult situation that had to get you from Texas back to California, and maybe that's what God needed to do. And now who knows what the next step is, but I'm so thrilled, Scott, because you and your family, you're still in church, you still love God, you know how important God is in your lives and in the world, and you're ready to step up when you feel the leading of God. Do you know how many people end up having bad experiences and they just write off God and they say that's it, and they're out of church, for years and years, and they're not reading the Bible with their family for years and years? And it's really a shame when you see that. It's not a shame when difficult situations come. Sometimes God uses those for where he needs to get us next. So, Scott, we're at almost an hour and 3/4. So we're going to need to sign off. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for joining us here on Bible Thumper, where somebody's got to say it.